Hey guys, Cade Wilcox here, host of the Primitive Podcast, where we take a deep dive into all things leadership. On today's episode, we have Dan Adams, who's the president and CEO of Cal Farley's Boys Ranch, this incredible nonprofit that serves youth who are really going through a tough patch in their life. I hope you enjoy this episode, and as always, thank you for joining us.
Especially now, be a calm in the storm. This year's the whole world is sort of panicked, and it's created changes in the national environment, social media, the politics, and all of the anxiety of the adult world trickles down to the children that we have in care. And what we have to do is maintain the sanity. And we don't have time really to take off. We're 365 days a year, 24/7. I really have to be the calm in the storm and say, you know what, folks, we're going to get through this.
Hey Dan, thank you so much for joining the podcast. So you're the CEO at Boys Ranch. You've been there a long time. For those who aren't familiar with Boys Ranch and aren't familiar with your leadership, tell us a little bit about how you came into this role and what your work looks like.
I guess I came into this role naturally. My parents were missionaries.
Okay.
So my youth I was raised on different mission stations in Congo and Zambia.
Okay.
And ended up at the Navajo mission right off the Navajo reservation in New Mexico in high school. And
Oh, wow.
I got to Texas when my father was appointed to First Methodist Church of San Angelo, and then to the chaplaincy over at the Methodist Children's Home in Waco. And that's how I actually got into this business. By that time, I was 17 and started working as a house father during my summer breaks from college.
Okay.
A young house father at a boys ranch down there in Waco, probably a fifth the size of Cal Farley's boys ranch.
Right.
But anyway, I was right at the grassroots level of that business in the trenches with those boys. And I remember thinking, I was a pretty cocky, young, healthy guy and college age. I thought, heck, I can go out there and handle those boys. And they played me like a fiddle. They were a lot better at being juvenile delinquents and oppositional and defiant than I was at knowing what to do about it. And I was an easy score. I mean, they could manipulate me. So it was humbling, but also just something that really touched my heart. And the rest is history. I have grown up in this business. That was back in the early 80s. That was actually in 1980.
Okay.
So I've been in this field ever since.
That's incredible. So maybe give a backstory of Boys Ranch. I grew up in West Texas my whole life and played football against Boys Ranch maybe once or twice. I grew up in Nazareth, but kind of short of that and hearing about it in the region, I'm not really familiar with the backstory. And so maybe share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah. Cal Farley came to Amarillo in 1925 to play baseball for the Gassers. And, he didn't make it into the major league, but he was an athlete and he became a world welterweight wrestling champion. And that on the West Coast and met a lot of people. But really liked Amarillo, came back, started a tire shop in 1934 in the early 30s. And in 34 started a place called the Maverick Club because he saw a bunch of boys running around on the streets with not enough to do. So the Maverick Club, which is still out there on I-40 east of town, and boys were coming in a little early and leaving a little late, and he realized that they didn't have a home. So he identified 9 boys and talked to Julian Bivens, who owned the footprint of Old Tascosa. And the old courthouse was there, and that became the dormitory for the Maverick Boys Ranch. And, later he cut ties with Maverick because they were local and he wanted to go national, and it became America's first boys ranch. And then it became Cal Farley's Boys Ranch in the 50s. So it actually started in 1939 Today, it's a 12,000 acre working ranch with 28 homes for kids. It's kids that come from all parts of the country that, their parents call because they're, at wit's end to know what to do. And so what we're trying to do maybe is cut a kid off at the pass from going into juvenile delinquency. We have beds for up to 290 kids. Of course, right now with all the shutdowns and everything, it's 2020 has been kind of a stagnant year that way because we're trying to protect the health and safety of the kids that are out there now. But in normal times, we have about, in the 200s of kids that go to Boys Ranch Independent School District, the Rough Riders that you played.
Yeah.
And we have K through 12, and it's kids who can't live at home for one reason or the other, and they come to Boys Ranch, and we try to, we can take a 5-year-old child and raise them and send them to college.
Wow.
And so I actually have about between 70 and 100 kids in college at any one time, and so it's pretty phenomenal because we do that at no fee for service, and it's pretty remarkable.
Wow. So you raise your annual budget?
We do. We actually, back in the earlier years, Cal Farley and the board started with the Cal Farley's Boys Ranch Foundation that was started back in 61 with just a little nest egg of money, and they always lived within their means, so they were actually raising more than they were spending, but they were investing money. And today we have two primary funding streams. One is an annual draw for the foundation, 4.8% of a trailing 5-year average of the value of that, and that brings in around 17 million a year. And then we raise the rest.
Okay.
And just over the years, people have donated oil and gas royalties, and so we get about a couple of million a year off of that, and then we raise around 24, 25 million. So our annual budget's around the $42 million range.
Wow, that's amazing. So is it fair to say that when Cal Farley, when he first started with this vision, that it was really small? I mean, it was just for a handful of kids and, trying to create some level of activity for them. You mentioned he started with 9. So over what course of time did it go, how long did it go where it was kind of like this small vision, just trying to help a handful of kids, to, a 12,000 acre working ranch with a $40+ million budget? I mean, what was that little journey like for him, even if
No, at first it was just to meet a need that he saw. And he was a great, if you ever read Malcolm Gladwell, in the book, The Tipping Point, he describes different types of people. And one of those types of people is a connector. There's just a small degree of separation between that person and anyone else in the country.
Right.
And Cal is a connector, and he rubbed elbows with some pretty substantial figures in the time. And so when he started Boys Ranch, the Julian Bivens was a big player around here. The Bivens family, they're still significant. And then he had a vision. Of course, it was 9 boys, and the first of those 9 boys just died last year.
Wow.
And I knew him, and that was it was really a powerful thing to know Alvis. He died about 95 years old. But yeah, Cal had a vision, and so he started Boys Ranch in 39 with those 9 boys, and decided that he needed a school for them. So back in 41, he goes down to the state legislature in Austin and asks for a school for Boys Ranch, and they created Boys Ranch Independent School District, which is still today a special purpose district. In the TEA code, in the education code, you see Cal Farley's Boys Ranch written in there. He knew he needed to market, and he needed support and donations. So of course, he had a radio program, but he also wanted to be able to get people out to Boys Ranch. So in 1944, he started the rodeo, and we still do the Boys Ranch annual rodeo today.
Hmm.
Back then, it was, just right out there in front of the courthouse. And today we have a stadium with, that seats about 5,000 people that we had the Labor Day rodeo. In 46, one of his peers was Father Flanagan of Boys Town, and Father Flanagan had made a movie called Boys Town with Spencer Tracy and Mickey Rooney, and Cal Farley decided, well, I need a movie too, and they had a movie called Boys Ranch, and it's an old black and white. You can see it today, and so he was that type of entrepreneurial figure. In 49, he started doing a newsletter and a direct mail program. He'd go to a Kiwanis or a Rotary meeting in Oklahoma City, say, and bring the phone book back. And he and his wife would go through the phone book and they'd mail people. And he reminds me, Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, and he wrote a little monograph called Good to Great for the social sector. Hmm. And he was describing what was called the hedgehog principle, and he came up with 3 questions. What are you really good at? Or what are you best in the world at, and how do you know it? And what are you inspired by? What inspires your passion, and how do you translate that to other people? Then what are your resource engines, and how do you keep them perpetuated? Sort of use that formula. So he used the newsletter and the mail and the movie to inspire passion in others. And then he created the foundation to keep the resource engines going. And of course, he always felt like he was the best in the world taking care of boys. So just a formula that our board continue to use.
It's powerful. At what point, this is the last question related to Boys Ranch. It's really fascinating. Then I want to kind of jump into leadership. But at what point did it go from like an exclusively, a boys focused school to, all students?
It was just boys up into the early 90s. And a woman named Mrs. Marjorie Remercy, wanted to build a home at Boys Ranch. We had all these homes and they're named after the different donors. And she said, I want to build a home, but I want girls in it. Well, it was a board splitting decision. They wanted to accept the home, but and some board members left, but they decided to go ahead and invite girls to live in that home. And there was another campus south of here called Girlstown that Boys Ranch had taken over back in the 80s. And they moved 9 girls up from Boys Ranch and put them in Ms. Remercy's home. And then Mrs. Remercy built 4 more homes. So there's Remercy 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Oh. And then we remodeled 3 other homes. And so there's 8 homes for girls at Boys Ranch today.
But that was an interesting time. I mean, we probably don't have time to go into all the details, but I bet that was an interesting time going from, just an all boys school and then introducing 9 girls to it. And I mean, I bet that was some interesting dynamics, even back in the 90s. I can't imagine making that transition in the 21st century. But
I came in as the administrator of Girlstown, and they, when Boys Ranch took over, they didn't have policies for girls. So the procedure manual that I had as the administrator of Girlstown, they just scratched out the word boys and put girls, but they're very different.
Yeah, it's very different. Very different. It's fascinating. Well, thanks for sharing all that. So tell me in kind of your view and like how you view leadership and like what you see your role as the president and CEO of Boys Ranch. What does leadership mean to you, and what does it mean to y'all's organization?
Well, it's modified or morphed over time because this was back in 2004 when I became the CEO. I'd been working for Cal Farley's for several years, and I came into it as a greenhorn not knowing what to expect, and over time you just acclimate. I think if there is such a thing called the Peter principle, where people migrate way beyond what their capacity is. Fortunately, that didn't happen to me, but I did grow in time. The hardest thing as a leader was to be able to let go of what I knew best, and that was the administration of children's programs. Because as the CEO, I had to be, I had to look at the whole picture: the fundraising, the foundation, the HR, the finance. And I think you're naturally drawn to being more involved in what I was, the program. So, just over time, what I realized was I had to focus on different things. And it has depended on the era. Sometimes I had to focus more. We had to restructure our foundation. And instead of, running that in-house, we outsourced it. And then I've spent more time in fundraising as of late. When we were in the initial stages, we were in a transformation, and I was more designing programs. So I think as a leader, my job is to keep the fire burning and keep the organization focused on the mission, and to try to maintain a vision for the future, which I think is part of our history. And then also, especially now, be a calm in the storm. With COVID, there's a tendency, this year there's the whole world is sort of panicked, and it's created changes in the national environment, the social media, the politics, and all of the anxiety of the adult world trickles down to the children that we have in care, and what we have to do is maintain the sanity. And we don't have time really to take off. We're 365 days a year, 24/7, and I really have to be the calm in the storm and say, what, folks, we're going to get through this, and we need to focus on why we're here, and I think that's what.
Yeah, that's good. There's a couple of things you said I would like to unpack. Practically speaking, when you think, you made the statement, your role is to keep the fire burning, and I assume what you mean by that is passion for what your organization is doing, and you mentioned vision. What does that look like for you on a personal level? Like, what do you do for your organization and the employees that you're leading and the teams that you're leading? What do you do practically to kind of keep that fire burning and to stay kind of, as you said, focused on the mission?
Well, number one, I think I have to believe it. And what's interesting about organizations, at least in my experience, is that everybody gets real excited about a vision, and they even get excited about the prospect of change. But when it boils down to it, if they don't have a good understanding of where they're going, they're going to hold on for dear life to what they've got. And so for me, the best thing I can do is the communication I do with all of the stakeholders. And that starts with my relationship with the board of directors, because a strategic vision actually comes out of that boardroom. And most of these guys are not, excuse me, people in child care administration. These men and women are in businesses of their own, and so they're kind of counting on me to say, this is what's right. This is what is mission centric. And then be able to communicate that to a leadership team that in a way that they can translate that to the people that work for them. And I think it has to fit with things that they understand and it makes sense to them. And I also then have to communicate that to our donor base, because we're so dependent on the donors that they have to believe in what we're doing. And so it's the communication and the relationships that I have to maintain and manage. It also includes alumni, because when alumni and old guard staff, when they see things that look different, it seems like alumni, they take a snapshot in time in their mind, and that's the way it always should be at Boys Ranch. And the whole world changes, but Boys Ranch is supposed to stay the same.
Yeah.
And that's not really the way it is, and I have to be able to make sense of that.
Hmm. How do you do this? Is all really great stuff. Like, what does your communication cadence look like? Like, real practical. Like, how often do you meet with the board, and then how often do you meet with your leadership team, and then funnels out that vision to the people that they're leading, and it kind of has that trickle effect amongst all your other stakeholders. So, what does that look like?
It looks this year. I'm not going to take this year off the table because we can't. But there's a big difference between meeting virtually and meeting in person. We have about 8 board meetings a month, and on my board there's 30 slots, and I probably keep around 16 to 18 board members. And we have board committees. So the full board meets 8 times a year, and it's usually a noon meeting, and we just kind of give an overview of all of the different things going on in programs, ops, finance, fundraising, and then we have an executive committee, which is made up of members of the various committees. We have a budget audit committee, and that meets quarterly. We have a program committee that meets quarterly, and we have a governance committee that meets about twice a year, and they oversee policies and bylaws and things like that. So you take in those 8 board meetings, the quarterly meetings of the committees, and then we also have the foundation board, and it meets on a quarterly basis. So the foundation is made up, the board is made up of members of the full board that go over it. And then it has 2 at-large members. So that's board meetings. I meet on a weekly basis right here at this table with my senior leadership team, and it involves my chief program officer, my chief operating officer, chief financial officer, fundraising, and my fundraising team, and my HR director. And we do a round robin, and those things have to tie somehow to what the organizational goals are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I for some people listening, that might sound kind of like a boring detail, but you talked about how critical communication is, and there's a method to communication. It doesn't just happen accidentally. And so I'm always really curious at, what people's meeting cadence is. Meetings can be really productive, and they can also be really non-productive. And there's a lot of valuable time there. So it's interesting.
Well, you're right. And so to me, the board meetings can go on forever. So I time limit them. They're an hour and a half, just about an hour and a half. Now with COVID and all, with virtual, you can time out and say, well, the clock's run out. We're gonna.
Yeah.
My leadership meetings, I learned those things could go on forever, so I limit them to about an hour and a half. So essential things, I think it's more efficient, and you get more out of meetings if they're time focused.
Yeah. That's good. Talk to me a little bit about failure. It seems like really great leaders, almost have like a philosophy or a way that they approach failure. And I'm curious if, what your thoughts on failure are, if there's a practical way that you try to learn from failure or document failure. So what has failure looked like for you as a leader, and, how have you tried to approach it?
I think failure is essential. I mean, if you don't fail, you're not really taking risks. And in this business, there's risk that's inherent. When you take, children from all over the country that have difficulties with their behaviors and emotion, and put them together on one campus, you're asking for some failure. I look at it in terms of what you can learn from it, and what was my role in that, and what would we do different next time. And I also think that you have to be able to evaluate it at the personal level. And when it comes to failures directly impact the care of the kids. You know, I look at it a little differently. And so, is it poor judgment on someone's part? Is it lack of knowledge on someone's part, or is it just pure meanness?
Hmm.
And that's at the grassroots level. So one of the things that we struggled with when I first came was we were in a transformational time, and kids were acting out a lot, and there was a lot of physical force to manage kids' behavior. And we worked away from that. We had to work away from that. And it got even to the point where we held such a high bar for someone intervening physically with an out of control kid that they were really afraid to do it. But if it did happen, if a staff member ended up getting into a physical confrontation with a kid just to manage their out of control behavior, that's when that question would come into play. Was it lack of knowledge about what else they could do to de-escalate the situation, or is that staff member just flat out mean, and does he like to fight? I mean, that was sort of at a basic sense. But also, I just had a meeting in the back with my fundraising team, and we're talking about our direct mail program and certain packages that we're going to send. And there's a lot of money in direct mail. And, if a package that you choose to send out to donors for Christmas doesn't work as well as you thought it would, then it's a budget driver. Hmm. But I'm not going to sell my soul to get the money. And what the whole deal is, it's like, am I going to send out a bunch of Christmas cards and stamps and stickers, or am I going to send out a story about a child? And so.
That's good. So, what's your approach to your own personal growth? I mean, you have a lot of people you're dealing with. You're dealing with a very large board. You're dealing with subcommittees. You're dealing with your senior leaders. You're dealing with families. You're dealing with students. You're dealing with community and regional stakeholders. You're dealing with donors and alumni. And so you have a lot of different things kind of pulling and vying for your time. So what's your approach to your own personal growth and staying accountable and staying inspired in the work that you're doing?
Well, again, that's changed with time. And, when I was younger in my leadership role, I was busy immersing myself in the other boards and associations and going down and speaking at hearings on child care legislation and all. And what I realized over time is that if I had a good team of people that worked for me, I started transferring some of that, delegating some of that to them. And over time, your own arrogance or need for your ego strokes sort of fades to wisdom and a confidence of a different kind, where you start shifting from it being about your own personal growth, where you start, where the person across the table from you starts mattering more. and I feel like I benefit at this point in my life by watching people who work for me be successful. And I think that comes with time. The other thing is you mentioned our mutual friend Alex. I do a lot of consultation and consulting with other business leaders, and I try to do it with business leaders outside of my field. That I think that nonprofit leadership has been notoriously negligent in terms of learning from our for-profit partners, in terms of business efficiency and the way they make decisions about what's important and what's not. So I oftentimes just ask somebody for, to drink, if I can have a cup of coffee with them and talk through a challenge that I have. And it ends up being very valuable to me. And I learned more from that kind of encounter than I ever did sitting in a seminar.
Yeah, that's really good. What have been some of the biggest personal influences in your leadership journey, and what are some of the things you've learned from them? I mean, you mentioned, your desire to learn from other leaders. Who are some of those influences throughout your kind of leadership journey, and what are some of the more critical things you've learned from them?
I would start with the when I was young and before I was in a leadership capacity or probably even thought about being in one. When I was in direct care or even mid-level management roles, the how I perceived the administrators or the leaders that I was responsible to, and I learned as much from the ones that I didn't care for than I did from the ones that I wanted to emulate. And what I mean by that is that I feel like I went into this business with a pretty good intuition about a right way and a wrong way. And I think I've watched other leaders make enough mistakes that I even said as a young guy, you know what, if I'm ever in a position of authority, I won't do that. Especially, when I was a house father with a bunch of kids. And I found myself in a place where I didn't have enough training. I was over my head. I didn't have enough supervision and help and support. And I remember thinking then, I was 23 years old, I said, I would never put someone in this position. And so as a leader, I learned from that, and I overemphasize supervision and training and teamwork and support. And then I did have, leaders, especially men, social workers who were really my mentors in making the decision to go get my master's degree in social work from the University of Texas, and then get into management. Social work, nursing, things like that have always been typically female dominated. And I felt like I had that calling, and so it was good to have some men that were in front of me. I've always been inspired by people who were innovators, who had a mantra that it's not about why I can't do something, it's how I can. And that fits with Boys Ranch. It fits with me. It fits with Boys Ranch. Is that there's always going to be barriers, whether it's regulatory or financial, and you're just going to figure out if you believe in where you're going, you're going to figure out how you're going to get there. And I've always been inspired by people who modeled that.
Yeah.
I look at the CEO who hired me. I think a lot of him because he believed in me and he saw something that I didn't even see in myself. And he was pure business and I was pure program. And together we were a great team. And he learned from me and I learned from him. And he took me to eat lunch over at Chili's one day. I had no idea about being a CEO. He said, Dan, oh, by the way, and this is at the end of the meal, we just elected you president. And I said, I don't remember applying for that job, Chris. And he goes, you've been applying for 10 years, young man. So I really appreciated that. And then the other is I'm influenced by young people who we serve. And I've always felt like oftentimes, especially kids that go into an institutional care, that society holds a low bar for them. And, kids will belly crawl under a low bar. But if you hold the bar higher, they will exceed your highest expectations. And that's what inspires me. So when I spend too much time around this office, I'll go out to Boys Ranch and I'll go over to the cafeteria and I'll watch kids coming in there and interacting, and I'll sit down with a table of kids, and that influences it influences me to be a better CEO for them.
Yeah. It's really good. Yeah, it's great insight. Thank you for that. All right, my last question for you. If you could speak to your younger self, 15, 20, 25 years ago, what advice would you give yourself based on what you know now?
Leave your ego at the door. Um, there's a there's a book I read the other day. It's called Ego is the Enemy, and it's by a guy named Ryan Holiday. And I think that all too often, people in leadership positions, especially if they have CEO title, spend a lot of time thinking it's about them when it really isn't. And I think that's the biggest stumbling block in leadership is not being able to understand or appreciate the gravity of the responsibility that you have for other people. And if you're able to do that, then what happens is that I think your satisfaction and your inspiration in life comes from the success of other people, the people that you have mentored. And I think about, I want to, an old guy, one of the old guard guys at Boys Ranch one day, I was up in the board meeting, and Cal Farley's daughter's sitting here to my left, and he's sitting over the big, patriarch is sitting to my right, and they've retired. But I'm talking about changes at Boys Ranch, changes to things that they started or that Cal started, and it was hard for me. And one day the old patriarch came up to me and said, "Dan, I support everything you're doing." He says, I was a product of my time, and there's no way I could do what you're doing now, but I think you wouldn't have been able to do what I did then. And just hope that history treats you kindly when you, when you're an older guy and people are in the trenches in a program that you set the stage for, and hope that they're kind to you. And I said, well, that's good. That's good advice.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. You're doing incredible work, and the leaders of your organization are doing incredible work, and it's been fun for me to learn from you and to listen. And it's real humbling, thinking about the work you're doing and why you're doing it, and not that I'm an expert at it at all, but just the insurmountable obstacles that you probably face on a daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis, from fundraising to regulatory issues to families and relationship dynamics. I mean, you're kind of in the trenches every day, and it's something I really admire. So thanks for joining the podcast, and thanks for all your time and your insight.
Well, thank you, and good luck to you. Happy Thanksgiving, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.